Some stories find us when we least expect them. I came across this one years ago, told by an old rancher in Arizona who claimed it happened to his grandfather. Whether every detail is true, I cannot say, but I know this much: the West was full of lonely men and hard choices, and sometimes the strangest encounters changed a man's whole life. This is a story about one of those men, a fellow named Daniel Brooks, who lived alone on a ranch outside Copper Springs for 7 years after burying his wife. He thought he was done with the world. Turns out, the world was not quite done with him. What follows is how it all began on an ordinary afternoon that became anything but it. The mare came out of the canyon at a dead run, stirrups flapping, saddle empty. Daniel dropped the fence post he was holding. The horse was lathered white, eyes showing too much rim, and the blanket under the saddle geometric patterns. Red and black was Apache work. He caught the reins. The mare fought him, then stood trembling, sides heaving like bellows, blood on the saddle horn. Not much. Enough. Daniel looked toward the wash where the tracks came from. Nothing moved out there but heat shimmer and a single buzzard making slow circles against the pale sky. He should let it be. Whatever trouble made that horse run was none of his concern. The buzzard dropped lower. Daniel swore under his breath, checked the rifle in his saddle scabbard, and started walking toward the wash. His boots crunched on dry grass. Somewhere behind him, his own horse nickered a warning, maybe, or just loneliness calling out to loneliness. He did not turn back. If you are enjoying this story, we would be grateful if you could subscribe and leave a like. From the data we have received, about 60% of our viewers have not yet subscribed. Your support helps us bring more stories like this one to folks who appreciate them. Thank you kindly for being here. The wash cut through the land like a scar, banks crumbling where spring floods had torn at the red earth. Daniel followed the tracks, hoofprints first, then drag marks, then nothing but scuffed dirt and a single moccasin print pressed deep into the sand. He found her 20 yards further. She lay against the cut bank where a mesquite root made a kind of shelf, dark hair matted with dust, buckskin dress torn at the shoulder. Her chest rose and fell in shallow pulls, each breath a small war. Daniel stopped. His shadow fell across her face. Her eyes opened. No panic, no flinch. Just 2 dark points fixing on him with the flat attention of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome and accepted them all. He raised his hands, palms out, crouched slow, the way a man might approach a wounded hawk. The canteen on his belt sloshed as he unhooked it. He held it toward her. She did not move. Her lips were cracked, gray at the edges. 12 days in this heat without enough water would do that. Maybe longer. Daniel set the canteen in the dirt between them, backed up 3 steps, sat down on a flat rock, and rested his forearms on his knees. The buzzard was still circling overhead. Its shadow passed over them both. Minutes crawled. The sun pressed down like a hand. Sweat ran down Daniel's spine, soaking his shirt where it met his belt. He did not speak, did not reach for his rifle, did not look away from her, but did not stare either, just kept his gaze somewhere around her collarbone, neutral as fence wire. She moved, one arm, sliding through the dirt, fingers closing around the canteen. She drank in small sips, controlled. The way someone drinks who knows how easy it is to bring it all back up again. When she finished, she set the canteen down, pushed herself up until her back was against the cut bank. Her eyes found his face again. Why, her voice came out like sand on stone. Daniel had no good answer. He turned the question over in his mind, found nothing and that made sense, and told her the truth. Don't rightly know. She studied him the way a person studies a locked door, looking for the trick. Then, from somewhere beyond the ridge, a horse whinnied, and it was not the Apache mare. Daniel's hand moved to his rifle before the sound died. The woman's eyes tracked his movement, but she did not flinch. Another whinny, then hoofbeats slow, deliberate, coming from the north ridge where the trail bent toward Copper Springs. Daniel rose to a crouch, pressed his back against the cut bank, counted the beats. One horse, maybe two. The dust plume was still too far to read. He looked at the woman. She had pushed herself higher against the bank, her jaw set tight. She knew what those hoofbeats meant better than he did. Can you walk? She did not answer with words. She planted one hand in the dirt and pushed. Her legs folded. She caught herself on the mesquite root. Breathing hard through her nose, Daniel crossed the distance between them. Held out his arm. She looked at it the way a person looks at a snake that might or might not be venomous. Then her fingers closed around his forearm dry, calloused, stronger than he expected from someone half dead of thirst. He pulled her up. She swayed, steadied. My horse is past that ridge, he said. 100 yards, maybe less. The hoofbeats were getting closer. She nodded once. They moved. Her weight against his shoulder was not much. She was lean, built for running, and the dress hung loose on her frame in a way that said she had been running a long time. Daniel kept his eyes on the terrain ahead, steering them toward the low ground where the sagebrush grew thick enough to break their silhouette. His horse stood where he had left it, ears pricked toward the approaching sound. Daniel helped the woman into the saddle. She gripped the horn with both hands. He took the reins and led them at a fast walk, angling away from the trail, keeping the ridge between them and whoever was coming. They did not stop until they reached the creek that marked the eastern edge of his property. The cabin sat on the rise beyond Small, weathered, a thread of smoke still rising from the chimney where his morning coffee had boiled over onto the coals. Daniel helped her down. She leaned against the porch rail, chest heaving, while he led the horse to the water trough. When he turned back, she was looking at the cabin, at the faded calico curtains in the window, at the rocking chair on the porch with one spindle broken. Her face did not change. But something behind her eyes shifted the way a person recalculates when the situation turns out different than expected. He opened the door. She stepped inside. The cabin was one room with a sleeping loft above, iron stove against the north wall, table and 2 chairs, a shelf of canned goods, and a basin for washing, everything in its place, clean enough, but with the bareness of a space that had stopped being lived in and become merely occupied, except for the curtains, and the quilt on the bed, blue and white, hand-stitched, the kind of work that took a winter to finish, and the small mirror by the door, hung at a height better suited to a woman than a man. The Apache woman looked at these things, and looked at Daniel. He went to the stove, ladled broth from the pot he kept simmering for days when he forgot to eat properly, set the bowl on the table with a spoon and a chunk of cornbread from the covered pan. She sat, ate, small bites at first, then steadier as her stomach accepted the food. Daniel sat across from her. The fire crackled. Outside, the light was going amber, the sun dropping toward the western mountains. She finished the broth, set down the spoon. You will have trouble, she said. Because of me? Had trouble before. Still standing, her eyes measured him. 3 men. They have been following me 12 days. There is a paper. She reached into a fold of her dress and pulled out a creased sheet, sweat-stained, torn at one corner, smoothed it on the table between them. Daniel did not need to read the words. He had seen enough wanted posters to recognize the format. The woodcut portrait was rough but clear enough, a woman's face, hair pulled back, the word reward printed above in thick black letters. $200, she said, for bringing me back to San Carlos. Or my body, if I resist. Daniel folded the paper, slid it back across the table to her. Why'd you run? The question hung in the air. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks against the stove door. My brother. Her voice dropped. 6 months ago, he left the reservation to find work, cutting timber in the mountains. He never came back. The agent said he was dead, but there was no body, no grave, no proof. She looked toward the window, toward the mountains going dark against the sky. I had to know. Daniel thought about Ellen. About the 3 days he sat beside her bed while the fever burned through her. About the grave he dug himself, in the hard ground behind the cabin, because he could not stand the thought of strangers touching her. You find anything, word, from another band, farther north? He may be with them, injured. They said, but alive. Daniel nodded, stood, went to the window and looked out at the empty land. The riders from the ridge had not followed, not yet, but they would be back. Men who hunted for bounty did not give up easy, not for $200, not when the trail was this warm. You can stay, he said, until you get your strength back, then we figure the rest. She did not thank him. She looked at the curtains again, at the quilt, at all the soft things a man alone would have thrown away years ago. Your wife, she said, not a question. Ellen, 3 years gone, but you keep her things. Daniel turned from the window. The last light caught the side of his face, and for a moment he looked older than his 42 years. Reckon I do. She held his gaze. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it, or at least to decide that looking further could wait. Outside, the darkness settled in, and somewhere on the trail to Copper Springs, 3 men were making camp, checking their rifles and talking about the reward money they would collect come morning. The first week passed slow. The way time does when 2 strangers share a small space and neither knows quite what to say. Nalin slept the first 3 days deep, heavy sleep that came from a body pushed past its limits, finally allowed to stop. Daniel checked on her when he came in from chores, left water and broth on the table by the bed, and went back out without speaking. She drank. She ate. She slept again. On the 4th day, he came back from the barn and found her standing at the stove, stirring the pot of beans he had left simmering. You should be resting. She did not turn around. I have rested enough. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. There was something in her posture, spine straight, shoulders set, that said arguing would be pointless. By the 5th day, she was helping with chores. Daniel came out of the chicken coop with a basket of eggs and found her at the woodpile, splitting kindling with the hatchet he kept by the back door. Her strokes were efficient, economical, the movements of someone who had done this work all her life. You don't have to, I know. She set another piece of wood on the block, swung, the kindling split clean. He watched her for a moment. Then he took the eggs inside and did not mention it again. On the sixth morning, Daniel came in from checking the cattle and stopped at the edge of the porch. The rocking chair sat where it always had, but the broken spindle was gone. In its place, a new piece of wood, not quite the right color, rougher than the original, had been fitted and bound with strips of rawhide until the glue set. He stood there looking at it, the chair Ellen had bought from a traveling salesman their first year here. The chair she had sat in every evening, watching the sun go down, telling him it was the only time the place looked pretty. He had not sat in it since she died. Naylin was at the well, pumping water into a bucket. She did not look up, did not acknowledge what she had done. Daniel went inside, and that evening he set 2 cups of coffee on the table instead of 1. The days found their rhythm after that. Morning chores, feeding the horses, checking the cattle, hauling water, afternoon work, mending fences, clearing brush, the endless small repairs that kept a ranch from falling apart. Evening meals, simple food, eaten in a silence that had begun to feel less like absence and more like agreement. She noticed things he had stopped seeing: the vegetable garden behind the cabin, gone to weeds and dead stalks. Ellen had planted it their second spring here. Tomatoes, beans, squash. After she died, Daniel had let it go wild. One afternoon, he came back from the south pasture and found Naline on her knees in the dirt, pulling weeds, turning the soil with her bare hands. "Ground's been fallow too long," she said without looking up. "Needs work before anything will grow." He stood at the edge of the cleared patch. The sun was behind him, throwing his shadow across the turned earth. "Ellen planted that garden," he said. Nalin's hands stopped moving. She looked up at him, her face unreadable. "I know." She went back to pulling weeds. That evening, they sat on the porch as the stars came out. The coffee had gone cold in their cups, but neither moved to go inside. Crickets sang in the grass beyond the fence. Somewhere in the pasture, one of the horses blew air through its nose. "The curtains," Nalin said. Her voice was quiet. "Your wife made them. First year, we was married. Said the place looked bare without them. They are old now. Reckon so." The silence stretched. Daniel looked at the mountains going dark against the sky. The same mountains Ellen used to watch from this porch. "My grandmother made baskets," Nalin said. Same pattern her grandmother taught her. When she died, I burned them. Daniel turned his head. Burned them. Apache way. The things a person makes. The things they touch if you keep them. The spirit stays, cannot rest, cannot travel on. She looked at the curtains through the window, pale shapes in the lamplight. "So we burn. The smoke rises, carries the memory where it needs to go." Daniel thought about that. About Ellen's things still hanging in the cabin, still folded in the trunk at the foot of the bed. 3 years and he had not touched them, could not bring himself to move them, throw them out, burn them. "Never thought of it that way," he said. "Your people keep things. Hold on. Suppose we do. Does it help?" The question landed like a stone dropped in still water. Daniel stared at his coffee cup, at the dregs swirling dark at the bottom. "Don't rightly know," he said. "Hasn't helped yet." The next morning, he found her at the well again. The pump was old, the leather seal worn, and it took a certain rhythm to get the water flowing short strokes to prime, then long pulls to bring it up. "Like this," he said. stepping beside her. He put his hands on the wooden handle, above hers, short first, then long. They pumped together. The water came up cold and clear, splashing into the bucket. Their hands were close on the handle, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her skin. Neither of them moved away. The bucket filled. Daniel stepped back. "You got it," he said. Nalin looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, something that had not been there when he first found her in the wash. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the lesson, for all of it." Daniel nodded, turned toward the barn. That night, she told him about her husband. 10 years gone now, soldiers had come to the camp looking for raiders. He was not a raider, he was a father, a maker of tools. But they did not ask questions. "My son was 3, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands around the coffee cup were tight. He died that winter. The coughing, sickness. Daniel did not say anything. There was nothing to say. "My brother is all I have left," she said. "That is why I ran. That is why I cannot go back to San Carlos, not without knowing." They sat in silence, while the fire burned low and the lamp flickered against the window. Two people carrying losses too heavy to set down, learning to sit with the weight of each other's presence. The night deepened. The coffee grew cold. Neither moved to go inside. And in the darkness beyond the ridge, where the trail curved toward Copper Springs, 3 points of firelight flickered, a camp settling in, no more than a 2-hour ride from the ranch, waiting for morning to come. Copper Springs sat in a shallow bowl of land where 2 creeks came together, the kind of place that started as a trading post and grew just enough to call itself a town. General store, saloon, livery stable, a church with a bell that rang on Sundays, maybe 200 souls if you counted the ranches scattered in the hills around it. Daniel rode in just past noon, the 2-hour trip from his ranch leaving dust on his coat and sweat on his horse's flanks. The sun hung white and mean overhead, and the streets were mostly empty. His horse's hooves raised small puffs of dust that hung in the still air. The hitching post outside the general store had 3 horses already tied, good animals, better than working stock, with saddles that showed hard use and saddlebags bulging full. He tied his horse at the far end of the rail, stood for a moment, looking at the other animals. The brand on the nearest one was unfamiliar. Texas, maybe, or further south. The bell above the door jangled when he stepped inside. Martha stood behind the counter, her hands busy with a bolt of fabric she was not actually measuring. Her eyes found him, held for a beat too long, then dropped. That was wrong. Martha always had a word for everyone. Asked after your health, your stock, your crops, talked too much. Some said, but meant well. Today she did not speak. Daniel walked to the counter, set down his list coffee, flour, salt, a tin of lard. Martha took it without looking at him, began pulling items from the shelves behind her. The store was quiet, too quiet. Old Patterson, who spent most days playing checkers by the stove, was nowhere to be seen. The widow Crane, who came in every Tuesday for thread and gossip, had not made her usual appearance. Martha set a sack of flour on the counter. Her hands were shaking. "Daniel," her voice came out barely above a whisper, "there's men been asking about you." He kept his face still. "What men?" "3 of them. Came in yesterday evening. Been asking around town about the ranches outside. Who lives where? Who's got hired hands? Who lives alone?" She glanced toward the door. One of them's been sitting on the saloon porch all morning, watching. Daniel did not turn around. What do they want? Martha's throat moved as she swallowed. They're looking for someone, a woman, Indian. They said, run off from the reservation. She set the salt tin down harder than necessary. They put up a poster on the board outside the sheriff's office. $200 reward. Daniel, that's what they're offering. Been telling everyone in the saloon about it. The door opened behind him. The bell jangled. Boot heels struck the wooden floor, measured, unhurried. The walk of a man who had all the time in the world. Mr. Brooks. Daniel turned. The man standing in the doorway was tall, lean, wearing a broadcloth coat too fine for this territory. His boots were polished despite the dust. A silver watch chain glinted at his vest pocket. He had the kind of face that smiled easily and meant none of it smooth, clean-shaven, with eyes the color of creek water in January. Don't believe we've met. The man touched the brim of his hat. Name's Hollister. I'm in the business of finding people who don't want to be found. Daniel said nothing. He could feel Martha behind him, rigid as a fence post. Hollister stepped further into the store. His eyes moved across the goods. On the counter, the flour, the coffee, the salt, a man's supplies, but enough for one person, or more. Fine ranch you got. Mr. Brooks, I rode past it this morning. Peaceful-looking place. He picked up a jar of peaches from the shelf, turned it in his hands, set it down again. Man could get comfortable out there. Quiet. Nobody bothering him. I like quiet. I can see that. Hollister's smile did not reach his eyes. Thing is, I'm looking for someone, Apache woman, about yay tall. He held his hand up, marking a height. Dark hair, thin, would have been traveling alone, probably looking half-starved. You seen anyone like that? Daniel met his gaze, held it. I live alone, don't see much of anyone. That's so, Hollister nodded slowly. Funny thing about lonely men. Mr. Brooks, sometimes they stop being lonely at inconvenient times. Take in strays, dogs, cats. His smile sharpened. Other things? Ain't got any strays. No. Hollister glanced at the supplies on the counter again. That's a lot of flour for one man. And salt. You preserving meat. Mr. Brooks, or feeding someone who works up an appetite. Daniel felt the weight of the rifle on his saddle outside. Too far. Not that it would matter, Hollister's coat hung open. And the pistol at his hip was well oiled, well used, positioned for a fast draw. I buy supplies once a month, Daniel said. Same as always, Martha can tell you. Martha's voice came out thin. That's right. He comes in regular. Same order every time. Hollister looked at her, then back at Daniel. The smile stayed fixed on his face. But something behind it shifted a predator, deciding whether to pounce now or wait. We've been tracking this woman 12 days, he said. Her trail went cold about 5 miles east of your property. Funny place for a trail to go cold. Almost like someone helped her disappear. Couldn't say. I mind my business. I'm sure you do. Hollister stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could smell the pomade in his hair, the leather of his gun belt, the faint whiff of tobacco. Here's the thing, Mr. Brooks, $200 is good money, but I'm a patient man. I don't need to find her today. I don't need to find her tomorrow. I just need to find her eventually. He leaned in. And I always do. Daniel did not step back, did not blink. Hollister held the moment. then straightened, brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve, and moved toward the door. "We're staying at the saloon," he said over his shoulder. "If you happen to remember seeing anything, I'd be much obliged if you'd let me know. There's a finder's fee, $20 just for information." He paused at the threshold. "Think about it. Mr. Brooks, a man like you living alone, no family, no ties, what's one Apache woman worth to you?" The door swung shut behind him. The bell jangled and fell silent. Martha let out a breath she had been holding. "Daniel, pack the supplies." His voice was flat. "I need to get back." She loaded everything into a burlap sack with trembling hands. Daniel paid, took the sack, and walked out into the street without looking back. Hollister stood on the saloon porch across the way, one boot propped on the rail, watching. Two other men flanked him, one squat and thick-necked, the other young and hungry-looking, the kind who did dirty work for a chance to prove himself. Daniel untied his horse, mounted, did not hurry. Hollister touched his hat brim again. "Safe travels. Mr. Brooks, we'll be seeing you." Daniel turned his horse toward the east road. He could feel their eyes on his back all the way to the edge of town, past the last building, past the creek crossing, until the trail bent and the hills rose up and Copper Springs disappeared behind him. He pushed the horse into a canter, then a gallop. The cabin came into view 2 hours later, smoke rising from the chimney, Nylan standing at the well with the bucket in her hands. She looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, saw his face, set the bucket down. "They found us," Daniel said before his boots hit the ground. "3 men. They know I'm hiding someone." He looked toward the ridge, toward the trail that led back to town. "We've got 3 days, maybe less." Nalin did not speak. She stood very still, the way she had stood in the wash when he first found her, calculating, accepting, preparing. Then she said, "There is a place in the mountains. Yeah. My people, they would shelter me there. But the journey is 4 days on foot, and I cannot leave yet." She looked at him. "There are things my uncle should know, signs I must leave for him to find, so he knows where I have gone." Daniel looked at her, at the cabin, at the faded curtains in the window. 4 days, and 3 men who had no intention of waiting that long. They came the next morning, just after dawn, when the light was still gray and the coffee had not yet finished boiling. Daniel heard the hoofbeats before he saw the dust. 3 riders, coming up the east trail at an easy walk, men who knew they had time, who knew where they were going, who had no reason to hurry. He set down his cup, crossed to the window. Nalin stood at the stove, her hand frozen over the coffee pot. Her eyes met his. "Stay inside," he said. "Don't come out. Don't let them see you." She did not argue, did not ask questions. She moved to the back of the cabin, to the corner where the sleeping loft cast a shadow, and pressed herself against the wall. Daniel took his hat from the peg by the door, stepped onto the porch, let the door swing shut behind him. The 3 riders stopped at the fence line, maybe 30 yards out. Hollister sat his horse in the center, that same polished look about him, coat-brushed, boots gleaming, silver watch chain catching the early light. The squat one flanked him on the left, hands resting easy on his saddle horn. The young one held the right, his fingers tapping against his thigh, restless, eager. Nobody moved for a long moment. The horses blew and stamped. A crow called somewhere in the distance. Hollister touched his hat brim. "Morning, Mr. Brooks. Hope we're not interrupting your breakfast." Daniel leaned against the porch post, crossed his arms, said nothing. "Mind if we come in, have a word? You can talk from there." Hollister's smile flickered but held. He dismounted in one smooth motion, handed his reins to the squat one, and walked toward the fence. His boots made soft sounds in the dry grass. He stopped at the gate, one hand resting on the top rail, casual as a neighbor come to borrow sugar. "We got off on the wrong foot yesterday," he said. "I was too forward. Comes with the job, you spend enough time hunting folks. You forget how to be polite." He spread his hands. "So let me start fresh. I'm looking for a woman. Apache, mid-30s. Been on the run about 2 weeks. Trail says she came this direction. You're the only ranch for 10 miles. He paused. "You sure you haven't seen her? Told you yesterday. I live alone." "That's what you said." Hollister nodded slowly. "Thing is, Mr. Brooks, my associate here," he gestured to the young one. "He's got a good eye for tracks. Says there's been 2 horses using your water trough lately, 2 sets of footprints around your well, and this is the interesting part, moccasin prints mixed in with boot prints, right there by your barn." Daniel did not let his face change. The morning air was cool, but sweat prickled along his spine. "I trade with the Mexicans sometimes. They wear moccasins." "Do they?" Hollister's tone made it clear he did not believe a word. "Well, maybe so. But here's my problem. Mr. Brooks, I've been doing this work a long time. 15 years, give or take. And I've learned something about people. They lie all the time. Rich folks, poor folks, good folks, bad folks put them in a tight spot, and they'll say whatever they think will make you go away." He took a step closer to the gate. "So I don't put much stock in what people say. I watch what they do." The squat one shifted in his saddle. The young one's hand had stopped tapping and now rested on his gun belt. "What I see here," Hollister continued, "is a man who's been living alone for years. No family, no hired hands, no visitors. Then suddenly, his patterns change. He's buying more supplies. He's nervous in town. He's got fresh tracks around his property that don't match his boots." He tilted his head. "What would you think? Mr. Brooks, if you were me..." Daniel looked at the 3 of them, at the guns on their hips, at the way they had positioned themselves, Hollister talking, the squat one watching the flanks, the young one ready to move. "I'd think I was wasting my time," Daniel said, "and I'd move on." Hollister laughed, a short, hard sound without warmth. "I like you, Mr. Brooks. You've got backbone. Most men in your position would be falling over themselves to cooperate. Invite us in, show us around, prove they've got nothing to hide." He glanced toward the cabin. "But you're not doing that, are you? This is my property. You're not welcome on it." "Fair enough." Hollister raised both hands in mock surrender. "We'll stay right here, and let me explain how this is going to go." He dropped the friendly act. His voice went flat, businesslike. "That woman in there, and she is in there. We both know it is worth $200 to me, dead or alive. The law says any Indian who leaves the reservation without permission is a fugitive. I have a contract with the reservation agent authorizing me to collect her, which means, Mr. Brooks, that you are currently harboring a criminal." Daniel's hands tightened on his arms. He kept his voice level. "She's not a criminal. She's looking for her brother. I don't care if she's looking for the Holy Grail. She broke the law. Hollister stepped closer to the gate. Now, I'm going to give you a choice. You can hand her over right now, today, and we all walk away friends. I'll even give you a cut, say, $50 for your trouble. Nobody has to know you helped. Or, his voice hardened, you can keep playing this game, and I will ride into Copper Springs, have a conversation with Sheriff Burke, and come back here with a posse and a warrant. We'll search every inch of this property. And when we find her, and we will find her, I'll make sure the whole territory knows that Daniel Brooks, respectable rancher, was hiding an Apache fugitive in his home. The young one grinned. The squat one spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Your call, Hollister said. But think about what you're risking. Your ranch, your reputation, your standing in the community. He gestured toward the cabin. For what? One woman, one Apache woman, who'll be back on the reservation by next week, regardless of what you do. Daniel looked at the cabin door. Through the gap in the curtains, he could see a shadow, Nylon. Watching, listening. He thought about Ellen, about the grave behind the cabin, about 7 years of silence and solitude, and a slow forgetting of what it felt like to care about anything beyond the next day's chores. He thought about the woman inside who had fixed his rocking chair without being asked, who had cleared his garden, who had sat with him on the porch and listened to his grief and shared her own. He looked back at Hollister. $200, Daniel said. That's what she's worth to you. That's right. And you'd kill her if she resisted, if necessary. Though I prefer alive and less paperwork. Daniel nodded slowly. Here's the thing, Mr. Hollister. I know what the law says. I know what the papers say. I know what kind of trouble I'm bringing on myself. He straightened up, took his weight off the porch post, and stood square. But I also know what's right, and they ain't always the same thing. Hollister's face went hard. You want to die for some Apache woman that it... Daniel held his gaze. Been dead 7 years anyway. Might as well go out for something. The words hung in the air. The squat one's hand moved toward his gun. The young one tensed, ready to draw. Hollister raised a hand, stopping them both. For a long moment, nobody moved. The sun had crept above the ridge now, throwing long shadows across the yard. A meadowlark sang somewhere in the grass. The coffee inside the cabin had boiled over. Daniel could smell it burning. Hollister smiled, but it was a different smile now, tight, cold, with teeth. All right, Mr. Brooks, you've made your choice. He turned back toward his horse. We'll be back, with the sheriff, with papers. And when we do... He mounted in one smooth motion and gathered his reins. You're going to wish you'd taken the $50. He touched his hat brim one last time, then wheeled his horse and rode toward the east trail, the other two falling in behind him. Daniel watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he let out a breath he had not known he was holding. The cabin door opened. Nylon stepped onto the porch. Her face was still, but something moved behind her eyes, something Daniel could not quite name. You should not have done that, she said. Probably not. They will come back, with more men, with guns. I know. She looked at him. Why? Daniel turned toward the mountains, toward the place where the sun was rising gold and red above the peaks. Don't rightly know, he said. Just couldn't do it any other way. Nylon was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and touched his arm just for a second. Light as a bird landing and taking flight again. "There is something I must tell you," she said, "about my people, about why they might come looking for me." Daniel turned to face her. "What do you mean?" She looked toward the mountains. The same mountain she had been watching every night since she arrived. "My uncle, Greyhawk, he is a war chief. I left signs along my trail, old marks, that only our people would recognize. If he has been searching for me, he will find them." She paused. "And he does not forgive easily those who take what belongs to his blood." Daniel woke to silence. Not the usual silence of the ranch at night, the kind filled with cricket song and cattle breathing, and the creak of the cabin settling on its foundation. This silence was different, wrong, empty in a way that pressed against his ears like water. He sat up. The loft was dark. The fire below burned to coals. Moonlight came through the window, falling across the floor in a pale rectangle. The corner where Nayland slept was empty. Her blanket lay folded on the chair. Her moccasins were gone. Daniel swung his legs over the edge of the loft and dropped to the floor. His bare feet hit the boards hard. He crossed to the door, pulled it open, stepped onto the porch. The night air hit him like cold water. He wore only his union suit. No boots, no hat. The moon hung 3/4 full above the eastern ridge, bright enough to cast shadows. The Apache mare was gone from the corral. He stood there for a moment, his hands gripping the porch rail, his breath making small clouds in the cold. Then he went back inside, pulled on his boots, grabbed his coat and hat, and headed for the barn. His horse nickered as he threw the saddle on. The leather was cold against his fingers. He cinched the girth, checked the bridle, led the animal out into the moonlight. The tracks were easy to follow, hoofprints in the soft dirt. Heading north toward the creek, then turning west toward the mountains. She had maybe an hour's head start, maybe less. Daniel mounted and pushed the horse into a canter. The land unrolled beneath him, silver and black in the moonlight, sagebrush and mesquite, dry washes and low ridges. He followed the tracks across the open ground, down into a shallow valley, up the far slope. The horse's breath came hard, steaming in the cold air. He found her at the creek crossing. She stood in the middle of the water, the mare's reins in her hand, the current pushing against her legs. The moon lit her from behind, turning her into a dark shape against the silver surface of the stream. She did not move when she heard him coming, did not turn, did not run. Daniel reined up at the water's edge. His horse stamped and blew, wanting to drink. He held it back. "Where are you going?" She did not answer. "Nalin, go home, Daniel." Her voice was flat, tired. The voice of someone who had made a decision and did not want to explain it. "Not without you." She turned then. The moonlight caught her face, the hard line of her jaw, the dark pools of her eyes. "This is not your fight. It never was. You made it my fight when you stayed. I should not have stayed." She took a step toward him, the water swirling around her knees. "I should have left the first night, before they came, before you—" She stopped. Her hands tightened on the reins until her knuckles went pale. "Before I what? Before you chose me over yourself." Daniel dismounted. The water was cold when he stepped into it, soaking through his boots, climbing up his legs. He did not stop. He waded toward her, the current tugging at his knees, the creek bottom slick with stones. "That wasn't a choice," he said. "That was the only thing I could do. You are a fool, her voice cracked. You are throwing away everything your ranch, your name, your life for a woman you met 2 weeks ago. A woman who cannot stay. A woman whose people and your people have been killing each other for generations. I know what I'm doing. Do you? She stepped back, and her foot slipped on the stones. She caught herself, but not before one knee went down into the water. The cold shocked a gasp out of her. She struggled to rise, and Daniel reached for her arm. She pulled away. Do not touch me. He stopped, stood there in the middle of the creek, water to his thighs, watching her push herself up on shaking legs. Her dress was soaked now, clinging to her body, and she was shivering, whether from cold or something else. He could not tell. You do not understand. Her voice had changed. Lower now, Chier. My people, your people, they cannot meet. There is only blood between us. Generations of blood. My grandmother watched soldiers burn her village. My mother was born in a cage they called a reservation. My husband, she stopped, drew a breath that shook. There is no bridge between our worlds, Daniel. There is only the river, and the river runs red. Daniel looked at her, at the water swirling around them both, at the moon hanging cold and distant above. Then we make something else, he said, or we both go back to being nothing. She stared at him, her face twisted not with anger, but with something worse. Something that looked like the face of a person watching the last door close. You want to know why I left? She waded toward the far bank, stumbled, caught herself on a rock. Her hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. I left because I am tired, tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being the reason good people suffer. She pulled herself onto the bank. Her knees gave out and she went down in the mud, hands sinking into the wet earth, hair falling across her face. Daniel crossed the rest of the creek, climbed the bank, stood over her. She did not look up. Her shoulders were shaking. Her hands had curled into fists in the mud, squeezing dark water between her fingers. I have nothing, she said. The words came out broken. No home, no family, no people who will claim me. I left everything to find my brother. And I do not even know if he is alive. I have been running so long, I have forgotten what it feels like to stop. She raised her head. Her face was streaked with mud and something that might have been tears, though the moonlight made it hard to tell. And now I have brought my trouble to you. A good man, a man who has already lost everything once, and I'm about to make him lose it all again. Daniel crouched down, his knees sank into the same mud. His hands were shaking too, though he could not have said why. You didn't bring trouble to me, he said. Trouble was already there. Had been for 7 years. I just stopped noticing. She looked at him, and her eyes were black in the moonlight, unreadable. Why? The word came out like something torn from deep inside. Why do you care what happens to me? Daniel opened his mouth, closed it. He had no answer. He had been asking himself the same question for 2 weeks, and the only thing he had found was more questions. He looked at his hands, sunk in the mud beside hers, at the creek behind them, still running, silver and cold, at the mountains rising dark against the stars. I don't know, he said, but I ain't leaving. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not until this is finished, one way or another. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold and muddy, gripping hard enough to hurt. "There is something you should know," she said. "About the men who are coming, about what they will do when they find me. I know what bounty hunters do." "No," she shook her head. "Not the bounty hunters, my people." Daniel went still. "What do you mean?" The moon slid behind a cloud. The darkness thickened around them. "My uncle has been searching for me since I left the reservation," Nayland said. "He sent word to every band within 200 miles. His scouts have been following my trail markers. And when he finds the man who has been hiding me—" She stopped. Her grip on his hand tightened. "He will not ask questions first." They rode back to the ranch in silence, the horses picking their way through the darkness, the moon sliding in and out of clouds. Nalan's dress was still wet, clinging to her legs, and she was shivering hard enough that her teeth clicked together. Daniel had given her his coat, but it was not enough against the cold night air. By the time they reached the cabin, the eastern sky had begun to pale, not yet pink, but no longer black. The exhaustion hit Daniel as he helped her down from her horse. His legs felt heavy, his eyes gritty with lack of sleep. He led both horses to the water trough while Nayland went inside. He found her standing by the stove, wrapped in Ellen's quilt, her hands stretched toward the heat. He built up the fire, made coffee, a cup beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said in the creek, in the mud, in the darkness. The sky outside went from gray to rose to gold. Daniel stood at the window, watching the light creep across the land, turning the sagebrush silver and the distant mountains purple. That was when he saw the riders. They came over the northern ridge in a line. Silhouetted against the sunrise, 8 figures on horseback, moving in formation, the lead rider sitting tall on a painted war horse. They did not hurry. They did not slow. They came on with the steady pace of people who knew exactly where they were going. Daniel's hand moved toward his rifle. "No." Nalan's voice came from behind him. She had risen from the chair, the quilt falling from her shoulders. Her face was still, but her eyes were fixed on the lead rider with something Daniel could not name. "That is my uncle." They stood on the porch as the riders approached. The morning air was cold, carrying the smell of sage and wood smoke and horseback sweat. Daniel counted the men 8 in all, wearing a mix of buckskin and cloth, carrying rifles and bows. Their faces were hard, unreadable. The faces of men who had seen enough trouble to stop being surprised by it. The lead rider reined up at the fence line. He was older than Daniel had expected, maybe 50, maybe more, with deep lines carved around his eyes and mouth, and gray threading through his braided hair. A bone breastplate covered his chest. His eyes swept across the ranch, the cabin, the corral, the cattle in the pasture, and came to rest on Daniel. He did not speak. Nalan stepped off the porch, walked across the yard, her bare feet leaving prints in the dew-wet grass. She stopped at the fence, looking up at her uncle, and said something in Apache, a long string of words that Daniel could not follow. Greyhawk listened. His face did not change. When she finished, he turned his gaze back to Daniel. This man, his English was rough, broken, each word placed carefully like a stone in a wall. He hid you. He protected me when no one else would. White men not protect Apache. They hunt. They kill. This one is different. Greyhawk was silent. His horse stamped and tossed its head. One of the other riders shifted, hand moving toward his rifle. But Greyhawk raised a finger, and the movement stopped. He dismounted. The other riders stayed in their saddles, watching. Greyhawk walked along the fence line, studying the property, the mended rails, the cleared garden and the water trough, full and clean, the cabin with smoke rising from the chimney, and curtains hanging in the windows. He stopped, looked at the curtains, faded calico, sun-bleached, the edges frayed. Then he looked at Daniel. "You live alone." "That's right. But you keep her things." He nodded toward the curtains. "Woman things." "Why?" Daniel felt Nalan's eyes on him, felt the weight of the question pressing against his chest. He thought about all the reasons he had given himself over the years that he was too busy to clean them out, that it did not matter, that no one would see them anyway. None of those reasons were true. "So, I remember how to not be alone," he said. "When the time comes." Greyhawk studied his face. The silence stretched. The sun had cleared the ridge now, throwing long shadows across the yard, and somewhere in the pasture a meadowlark began to sing. Greyhawk nodded. Once. Slowly. He turned to Nalan and spoke in Apache. His voice was different now, still hard, but with something underneath the hardness. She listened, her hands clasped in front of her, and when he finished, her whole body seemed to change. Her shoulders dropped, her chin lifted, and her eyes filled with something that Daniel had never seen there before. "My brother," she said. Her voice came out broken. "He's alive. He's with another band, in the northern mountains. Injured, but alive." Daniel let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Greyhawk stepped toward him, close enough that Daniel could smell the leather and sage and wood smoke that clung to his clothes, close enough to see the old scars on his hands, the weathered lines around his eyes. "You protect my blood," Greyhawk said. "This is debt. I don't need it is debt." His voice left no room for argument. "My people not forget." The sound of hoofbeats came from the south. Daniel turned. Hollister and his men crested the ridge at a gallop, the sheriff riding beside them with his badge glinting in the morning sun. They pulled up hard when they saw the Apache riders, horses skidding in the dust. For a long moment, nobody moved. Daniel counted 4 white men on one side, 8 Apache warriors on the other. Hollister's face had gone tight, his hand hovering near his pistol. The young one looked like he might be sick. Even the squat one had gone pale. Sheriff Burke was the first to speak. "What in blazes, Sheriff?" Hollister's voice was strained. "The woman, she's right there. We can what?" "Hollister." Burke's eyes moved across the Apache riders. They had not drawn weapons, had not moved. But their presence, 8 armed men, mounted and ready, positioned between the bounty hunters and the ranch, said everything that needed to be said. "There's 8 of them," Burke said quietly. 8 warriors. And you want to start something over $200. The law says I have Burke turned his horse. "And my discretion says this ain't worth dying over." Hollister's jaw clenched. His hand twitched toward his gun. And for a moment, Daniel thought he would draw anyway. Thought the whole thing would end in blood and smoke and bodies lying in the morning grass. But Hollister did not draw. Something in him, some calculation of odds, some instinct for survival. Or maybe just the last shred of sense he possessed held his hand. "This ain't finished," he said. His eyes found Daniel's across the yard. "You hear me? Brooks, this ain't finished." He wheeled his horse and rode, the other two following. Burke lingered a moment longer, his eyes moving from Daniel to Nayland to Greyhawk. Then he touched his hat brim, turned, and followed the others over the ridge. The hoofbeats faded. The dust settled. Greyhawk looked at Daniel. For the first time, something that might have been respect showed in his weathered face. "You choose hard road," he said. "They come back. I know. You could leave. Go where they not find." Daniel looked at the cabin, at the curtains, at Nalin, standing by the fence with the morning light catching her face. "No," he said. "I'm done leaving." Greyhawk studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded and turned to his horse. "We take her home," he said. "To brother, to people." He mounted, gathered the reins. "But this place," he looked around the ranch one more time. "Not forgotten. Not by me. Not by her." He spoke a word in Apache. The other riders turned their horses, forming up around Nalan's mare. She mounted, looked at Daniel. "I have something for you," she said. She reached into the fold of her dress and pulled out a small object, a woven bracelet, leather and beads and a single thread of turquoise running through the center. "My grandmother made this, the same pattern her grandmother taught her." She held it out. "So you remember." Daniel took it. The leather was worn smooth, soft against his fingers. "See you when I see you," he said. She almost smiled, and the first time he had seen anything close to a smile on her face. "See you when I see you." She turned her horse and rode toward the mountains. Greyhawk rode beside her, the other warriors falling in behind. Daniel watched until they disappeared over the ridge, until the dust settled and the hoofbeats faded and the only sound was the wind in the grass and the meadowlark still singing. He looked down at the bracelet in his hand. Then he looked at the cabin, at the faded curtains in the window. She was gone, but the bracelet was warm against his palm, and the morning light was gold on the mountains. And for the first time in 7 years, Daniel Brooks did not feel alone. The question now was whether the peace would last, or whether Hollister would return with something worse than a sheriff and a warrant. The months passed the way months do on a ranch, measured in seasons and chores, and the slow turning of the land from brown to green, to gold, and back to brown again. Daniel planted the garden in spring. Beans first, then tomatoes, then squash, the same things Ellen used to grow. He did not know if they would take. 7 years of neglect had left the soil hard and tired. But he turned it anyway, worked in manure from the barn, watered it every evening when the sun went down. The beans came up first, small and pale, but alive. Then the tomatoes. Then green shoots of squash pushing through the dark earth. He fixed the barn door in April, oiled the hinges, planed the wood where it had swelled with moisture, rehung it so it swung true. Then he fixed the fence by the south pasture, the one he had been meaning to get to for 3 years. Then the roof of the chicken coop. Then the step on the porch that had been loose since before Ellen died. Martha noticed when he came into town for her supplies. "You're looking different," she said, setting his order on the counter. Less like a man waiting for something, and more like a man doing something. Daniel did not know what to say to that. He paid for his goods and rode home. Word had spread through Copper Springs about what had happened at his ranch. Some folks avoided his eyes when he came to town. Others nodded with something that might have been respect. Old Patterson stopped him outside the general store one afternoon and said, "Took guts, what you did. Don't matter what anyone says." Then he walked away before Daniel could respond. Hollister and his men had left the territory. Martha told him that said they rode out the day after the confrontation, heading south toward Texas. Whether they would come back, nobody knew. But the wanted poster had come down from the board outside the sheriff's office, and Sheriff Burke had stopped asking questions. Summer came hot and dry. The creek dropped low enough to show the stones on the bottom. Daniel hauled water for the cattle, bucket by bucket, morning and evening. His hands cracked and bled. He wrapped them in cloth and kept hauling. At night, he sat on the porch in the rocking chair, the one Nalin had fixed, the one he had not sat in for 7 years, and watched the stars come out over the mountains. The bracelet stayed on his wrist. He did not take it off, not even to wash. The leather darkened with sweat and water and wear. The turquoise thread faded in the sun. But it stayed. Sometimes he thought about Ellen, about the life they had planned together, the children they had talked about, the future that had ended in 3 days of fever and a grave behind the cabin. More often, he thought about Nalin, about the way she had looked at his curtains, at his quilt, at all the soft things he had kept, about the question she had asked, "Does it help?" and his answer that it had not helped yet. He thought maybe it was starting to help now. Not the keeping, but the remembering who he had been before the silence closed in, remembering that he had known how to talk to people once, how to laugh, how to sit on a porch with someone and watch the sun go down. Fall came early that year. The leaves on the cottonwoods turned yellow in September, and the nights grew cold enough to see your breath. Daniel brought the cattle in from the far pastures, stacked firewood by the cabin door, patched the gaps in the walls where the wind came through. He took down the old curtains in October. They came apart in his hands, the fabric so sun-rotted that it tore like paper. He stood there holding the pieces, looking at the bare window, at the light coming through unfiltered for the first time in 10 years. He rode to Copper Springs the next day. Martha had fabric calico, like before, but a different pattern. Blue and white instead of faded yellow. He bought enough for 2 windows and rode home. He did not know how to sew curtains. Ellen had made the old ones herself, sitting by the lamp in the evenings, her fingers moving quick and sure over the fabric. Daniel had watched her, but had never learned. He learned now, badly. At first the stitches crooked, the hems uneven, the whole thing looking like something a child might make. But he kept at it. A few evenings of work, until the curtains hung in the windows and the cabin looked different. Not better. Maybe, but different. Like a place that was trying to be lived in again. Winter came and went. The snows were light that year, melting fast, leaving the land wet and ready for spring. Daniel planted the garden again, earlier this time, and watched the first shoots push through the soil with something that felt almost like satisfaction. He was watering the tomatoes when he heard the hoofbeats. One rider, coming down from the North Ridge, following the trail that led from the mountains. Daniel straightened up, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked to the fence. The rider came on slow and steady, in no hurry. The horse was a paint white and brown, with Apache markings on the bridle. The rider sat easy in the saddle, back straight, head held high. Daniel's chest tightened. She reined up at the fence line. The late afternoon sun caught her face, and Daniel saw that she looked different too, stronger, fuller. The hollows under her eyes were gone, and there was color in her cheeks that had not been there before. She looked at the cabin, at the new curtains in the windows, at the garden, green and growing, at the rocking chair on the porch, the one she had fixed all those months ago. "You have been busy," she said. Daniel leaned against the fence post. His heart was beating hard, but he kept his voice level. "Had time on my hands." She dismounted, led her horse to the water trough, let it drink. Daniel watched her move the same economy of motion, the same watchfulness, but easier now, less like a hunted animal, and more like a woman who knew where she belonged. "Your brother," he asked, "alive, healing? He walks with a limp now, but he walks." She looked up at the mountains, toward the peaks still capped with snow. "He sends his thanks to the man who kept his sister safe. Didn't do much, just gave you a place to rest. You did more than that." She turned to face him. "You stood when you could have stepped aside. That is not a small thing." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind moving through the grass, the horses drinking, the sun warm on their faces. "Your curtains are different," she said. Daniel looked at the cabin. "Old ones fell apart. Had to make new ones. You made them yourself. Didn't have much choice." She walked to the porch, climbed the steps, touched the curtain in the window, running her fingers over the stitches crooked, uneven, nothing like Ellen's careful work. "They are very bad," she said. Daniel almost laughed. The sound surprised him. He had not laughed in so long that he had forgotten what it felt like. "Reckon they are." Nalin turned. She was smiling a small smile. Barely there, but real. The first real smile he had ever seen on her face. "My grandmother's pattern," she said. "I could show you, if you wanted to learn." Daniel looked at her, at the smile, at the way the light fell across her face. "Might take a while," he said. "I'm a slow learner. I am patient." She came back to the fence, stood close enough that he could smell the sage and wood smoke that clung to her clothes. The same smell that had clung to Greyhawk, close enough that he could see the fine lines around her eyes, the gray just starting to show in her hair. "I told my uncle I would return," she said, "to check on the man who helped me, to see if he was still standing. Still standing. I see that." She looked at the garden, at the cabin, at the mended fence and the oiled gate and the rocking chair on the porch. "You have built something here. Something good. Trying to?" She nodded, reached into the fold of her dress and pulled out a bundle of fabric, folded tight, the colors bright against her hands. "My grandmother's pattern," she said again. "For your curtains, if you want them." Daniel took the bundle. The fabric was soft, woven in a pattern he did not recognize, red and black and white, geometric shapes that seemed to move when he looked at them. "These are Apache colors," he said. "Yes. People will talk. Let them talk." She looked at him, and her eyes held something he had not seen before, not the wariness of a stranger, not the calculation of a survivor, but something warmer, something that looked like the beginning of trust. "I cannot stay," she said. "Yeah, not yet. My people need me. My brother needs me. Out." She paused. "I can come back. When the seasons turn. When there is time." Daniel looked at the fabric in his hands, at the curtains in the window, at the woman standing before him, offering something he had not dared to hope for. I'll be here, he said. She nodded, mounted her horse, looked down at him from the saddle. Your wife's curtains, she said. They were faded, old, falling apart. I know. But you kept them anyway, for 7 years? Daniel did not answer. He did not need to. Nalin gathered her reins. Maybe some things are worth keeping, even when they are old, even when they are falling apart. She turned her horse toward the mountains. See you when I see you. Daniel Brooks. See you when I see you. She rode up the trail, toward the ridge, toward the mountains where her people waited. Daniel watched until she disappeared over the crest, until the dust settled and the hoofbeats faded and the only sound was the wind in the grass and the water running in the trough. Then he went inside, set the fabric on the table, put the kettle on the stove. 2 cups sat on the shelf by the window. He took them down and set them out, side by side, where the afternoon light could reach them. The cabin was quiet, but it was not empty. Not anymore. There is a quiet that settles after a story like this one. Not the kind that asks to be filled, but the kind that simply sits with you. The way evening light sits on an empty porch. Perhaps you know something of what Daniel carried. Many of us do. The years that pass without anyone noticing. The small repairs we make to keep ourselves standing. The things we hold on to long after they have faded. Because letting go feels too much like forgetting. And perhaps you know something of what Nalin carried too. The weight of searching for someone who may or may not be waiting at the end of the road. The exhaustion of being strong for so long that you forget there was ever another way to be. These are not lessons. They are just the shapes our lives sometimes take. It is all right if this story did not resolve everything. Most true things do not. It is enough to have listened. It is enough to have stayed. Me feelings are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be felt, and then most gently allowed to rest. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way through.